After this, we need to share the airtime to our colleagues from OceanMind. May I invite Ms. Natalie Telwright to present. Her presentation title is Innovation for Combating IUU Fishing, the OceanMind initiative. But before presentation, I slightly briefly inform you that she is the senior fishery analyst at the OceanMind, and she graduated Master of Science in Master Conservation from UCL University College, London, UK. And Natalie support Department of Fishery Thailand to conduct capacity building and process improvement of MCS activity in Thailand. She also has experience working as the commercial fisher, fishery observer, and fishery researcher. Natalie, airtime is yours.
Hello everyone, and thank you so much to SEAFDEC for inviting me to speak today. My name is Natalie Telwright and I'm a Senior Fisheries Analyst, and I'll be discussing some of the innovations that OceanMind have created and that we use to combat IUU fishing. OceanMind is a not-for-profit organisation based in the UK but working globally to empower enforcement and compliance. And our innovation is fundamentally driven by a need to combat some of the core challenges to tackling IUU that I'll discuss. And so some of these challenges include the transnational nature of fisheries crime. Often many stakeholders from different countries and jurisdictions are involved. For example, there's the flag state, the coastal state, the port state, the nationalities of the individuals and the operators on board. And the fact that IUU fishing fleets may be well organised and operate in coordinated fleets. So that's combined with also complex layers of, say, companies and beneficial ownership. And it means that the ability for regular changes in, say, vessel identities, such as colour, name and flag state, means that vessel identification and apprehension can be extremely challenging. This creates the need for innovative solutions to combat some of these challenges. And so I will be going through three main innovations of how we're addressing some of these challenges. So the first one will be the use of remote sensing data, primarily from satellites, to detect vessels and dark vessels that do not transmit using typical tracking technologies. Then I'll be discussing machine learning and our ability to produce automated alerts of suspicious and possible non-compliant activity. And then finally, I'll be discussing a new tool that we are developing to support the analysis of the Port State Measures Agreement in order to conduct pre-arrival risk assessments. So remote sensing is the process of detecting and monitoring physical characteristics of an area, and primarily we use different satellite data sets. The challenge that remote sensing attempts to resolve is fundamentally there is a huge area for fishing vessels to operate. 71% of the Earth's surface is covered in water, and so even though the majority of the world's fishing takes place in national waters, there is still a huge opportunity for areas of operation. Furthermore, the majority of the world's fishing vessels are mainly small scale and therefore do not carry transponders, which makes them very difficult to monitor and trace. Even for the vessels that do carry transponders, this data can sometimes be manipulated. And furthermore, monitoring these vessels using traditional monitoring, control and surveillance tools such as, say, at-sea patrols are often very costly and can be prohibitive. Remote sensing is a fantastic opportunity to address these challenges, and now more than ever, because there are more satellites in orbit than ever before. And these satellites have a range of sensors, from radar to Electro Optical, which is like a photograph, to detecting visible infrared. This means that our ability to detect vessels at sea has greatly improved, and it's getting cheaper and cheaper as more satellites are launched, meaning that this is an extremely cost-effective solution. These diagrams depict just some of the footprints of satellite data sets that we use. So on the left-hand side, we've got freely available satellite sources, and the red circles depict the footprint, so the area that these satellites can detect. And the video is just a few short hours, but you can clearly see that there's quite a lot of coverage, even from the freely available data sets. The right-hand side video depicts the coverage from some of the commercial data sets. And this is just a short selection because if I were to include all commercial data sets, you wouldn't be able to see the Earth. It would just be one giant red mess. And so this really gives an idea of the coverage of remote sensing satellites and the amount of data that is being collected. And so I'm going to run through some of the different capabilities of these remote sensors to build a picture of how we are successfully using and implementing this type of data set to combat IUU phishing. So the first example is of electro-optical imagery, and you can think of this like a photograph, and it's often in a true color image. On the left-hand side, we've got an image that's 20 meters in resolution, and then the two images on the right-hand side are greater resolution down to 50 centimeters. And these images are taken across the same location at varying points in time. And as we can see, this data set is extremely useful to identify, in this case, vessels in port. And so even the freely available data set that is 20 meters, we can still detect the location of vessels, and we can detect when they're leaving, and we can detect when they're returning to port. And so this is really helpful to identify if there may be illegal port visits, or if we're monitoring vessels of interest when they're coming in and out of ports. Synthetic aperture radar is another data set that we frequently use, and fundamentally it works like radar on board vessels, but just taken from space. And so it works by reviewing the reflection of electromagnetic waves. So the image on the right-hand side is a SAR detection of a large carrier. And the reason why it's in black and white is because you are just seeing the reflection. It's not like the electro-optical that's a true color image. And we can clearly see in the reflection features of the vessel. So you can see the bright reflection at the stern of the vessel, which is the bridge. And you can see the long elongated vessel shape characteristic of a vessel carrier. We can also detect characteristics pertinent to high seas, purseaners and longliners, which makes this data set extremely useful for monitoring marine protected areas and closed areas. It's also extremely cost effective in comparison to electro-optical, and you can monitor large areas of the ocean. So we are using this data set with a number of our partners, both in the UK, but also with the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources in the Philippines, under the Verimar project, to monitor some of the marine protected areas to look for possible vessel incursions. Using these types of data sets means that we can also start to detect vessel activity. Because these data sets are getting so good and the resolution is getting so high, we can even detect the types of activity. And so the image that you see on the right-hand side shows a purseaner setting, and you can see the float lines encirculating the vessel in the center. So this is classic fishing activity behavior from a purseine vessel. And this can be tremendously useful because you know the activity and you know the location. So if, for example, this was detected in a closed area or in an area where purseining is prohibited, this would provide significant supporting evidence for IUU activities. We can also detect the identities of vessels. And so I'd like to explain about a case study that we are working on with our partners in the Royal Thai Government Department of Fisheries. also in collaboration with the International Justice Mission. And so on the left-hand side, we have a photo of a IUU listed vessel. And this photograph, we have annotated it to highlight the key features of the vessel. The right-hand three images are electro-optical, and we have also depicted the same features that are persistent in these images. And so with this type of information, we can start to identify the same vessel in different locations. And so in this case, we've identified the vessel in a certain port. We can see when the vessel leaves port. We can see when the vessel returns to port. So we can start to build a picture of this unique vessel's activity. This enables us to work with the relevant port authorities as well to inform them of these activities, to inform them of the likely identity of the vessel, so they can take enforcement action. And this is all part of transforming information into intelligence. And so this is about layering different rules, different data sets, to build a picture, to build documentation towards evidence. So here we have another electro-optical image of two vessels that are possibly transshipping. These vessels were also transmitting on AIS, and so in the bottom right you can also see the speed time graph. And these vessels were travelling very slowly at drifting speeds, which is indicative again of a transshipment. And because we have the transmitted identity of the vessel, we can look into photos of these vessels, and we can correlate that with the electro-optical imagery here to confirm if it is that vessel. Because we know the location as well as the time, we can also look into the relevant rules and regulations for that area, and look into the authorizations and licenses of that vessel to determine compliance. And so this is just an example where we've layered multiple different data sets to build up an intelligence picture of what is going on the ground to inform enforcement action. Machine learning is something that we have developed over the past few years, and we apply it across the board to multiple partnerships and programs. The challenge that machine learning addresses is fundamentally one of scale and complexity. There are hundreds of thousands of vessels to monitor at any given moment, and fisheries management is often very complex. There are different fisheries management areas, closed areas, gear restrictions, time restrictions. These layers of complexity mean that manual monitoring is often very difficult and can be too burdensome for any given fisheries monitoring centre to conduct. Furthermore, fisheries divisions can be poorly funded and under-resourced, which means that if there's low staffing levels, they simply cannot manually monitor the level of activity and the complexity of activity needed to determine compliance. Furthermore, it's also quite challenging to measure fishing effort, because often fishing informed fisheries management and fishing effort uses landing data or estimated catch per units efforts, or say trip length, and so it's not very granular. And so machine learning also presents an opportunity to resolve some of those issues. Machine learning is a method of automated data analysis. It's a branch of artificial intelligence premised on the idea that systems can learn from data and then identify patterns in that data with minimal human intervention. This means that we can train an algorithm to automatically detect certain activities of our choosing. Then we can apply the relevant rules and regulations to that activity to determine compliance and also be alerted to that type of suspicious behaviour of interest. So, for example, we can train our algorithms to specifically detect purse-seining or trawling, and then we can layer the closed areas and the management regulations to determine compliance. The outputs are automated alerts of suspicious activity, and this significantly reduces the burden on fisheries monitoring centres to empower and enable them to monitor and use their investigative capacity on the highest risk vessels. So rather than having to monitor tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of vessels at a given moment, they can target their efforts towards the few or the 100 vessels that have been highlighted and alerted to being high risk. This means that it is an extremely cost-effective solution to the challenges that I just described. I'd just like to quickly show you some of the raw outputs of our machine learning algorithms. And so these outputs are then transformed into alerts, but I'd like to show you how we got there. And so on the left-hand side, you'll see a map with a track of a vessel, and the colors represent different machine learning activities that are automatically detected. And those activities are highlighted in the legend in the top left. On the right-hand side, we have a speed time graph, and so we can see the time moving along the bottom, and the grey squares denote when it's nighttime local time. And so what we can see is the algorithm consistently detects patterns of recovery and setting and then fishing, and in this case it is a trawl vessel. I'd just like to pause it here because the algorithm now has detected that the vessel met with a supply vessel, and it's automatically detected a possible transshipment, and then the vessel returns and continues this typical trawl pattern of hauling back and setting and fishing about 4 times per day. And so these raw outputs are then transformed into something that is usable, and then, like I said, layered with the relevant rules and regulations to produce outputs of alerts. So the fact that we can now detect phishing activity means there is a wide array of applications that we can use this for, and we are currently using it to determine fishing effort. And so we've partnered with the Department of Fisheries in Thailand to not only develop these algorithms but to also produce these outputs to better inform fisheries management. And so on the left hand side we can see a heat map of fishing activity by the number of fishing days, and so the high intensity blue color denotes when there's high numbers of fishing days. So we can actually start to quantify fishing effort beyond the typical analysis that is conducted, say CPUE calculations or landing. On the right hand side we have a video of actual machine learning detections, and in this case these are pair trawlers, and what we can see is when the seasonal closed areas come into effect, we see a shift in fishing effort, and then that shift returns once the seasonal closed area is no longer in effect. And this type of analysis and information again is extremely valuable for fisheries management measures to inform more sustainable practices. But really the main outputs of machine learning are automatic detections of suspicious activity. And so here we have a track of a vessel, and on the left hand side we've got the relevant alerts for different non-compliant activities that are highlighted. And so we can start to filter these alerts depending on the activity, depending on the level of confidence and the suspiciousness. And so this means, again, that control officers and monitoring officers can look at this information and target their resources towards these vessels that have the alerts. We recognize that simply passing on these alerts and this type of information, though, is not always good enough. And so we've built in processes with our partners to ensure that intelligence is actionable. For example, that it's timely and it's useful and it's transferable. So for example, with our partners, the Thai DOF, we've developed a 2-tiered notification process with them for high-level targets, urgent targets, and these are where we have a high level of confidence that an offence has taken place and therefore it requires immediate action. And then we have suspicious targets where the information suggests an offence that requires investigation, but it's less immediate. And combined with this notification process, we also provide recommended lines of investigation. And importantly, accountability has been built into the information transfer system. And this ensures that action is taken and that there's a feedback mechanism. So once you send the intelligence, you know it's been actioned on and you also get the results. Building in these processes combined with the machine learning alerts means that there have been increases not only in the number of detections of, say, suspicious notifications, but also in the follow-up action taken and the enforcement action taken on these notifications. Finally, I would like to cover an exciting development that we are working on for a port state measures analysis tool. The Port State Measures Agreement is a really potent and cost-effective means to combat IUU phishing by preventing foreign flagged vessels that have engaged in IUU phishing from, say, using ports and landing their catches. Nonetheless, though, there are some challenges to implementing the PSMA, and these are mostly around information sharing and technical constraints. This is because to conduct thorough compliance checks and risk assessments into the foreign flag vessels arriving in ports, a significant amount of information is needed, and often there's a lack of information systems in place and a lack of integrated databases. Port authorities need to review vast quantities of data, analyze multiple data sets, and be experts in numerous different control, conservation and management measures. So, for example, they need to look at RFMO IUU lists, the CMMs, vessel information and authorizations, and then the vessel details and identity itself. Furthermore, port controls also involve multiple different agencies. For example, there's the fisheries departments, but there may also be customs, immigration, the Navy, the police, health. And so this creates a need to exchange information between these different interagencies. Our response to these challenges is the development of a web-based tool which enables pre-arrival risk assessments to take place. And the tool is premised on the fact that tracking data, when combined with other data sources, can be a really useful indicator for a risk analysis. And so we're developing this in collaboration with our partners, and it will be implemented at the national level. And fundamentally, it works like a risk assessment to identify indicators of non-compliance before vessels arrive in port. And it does this using some of the tools that I've discussed, so machine learning, alerts, by comparing the observed activity, say on AIS data, with what was reported on the advanced request to enter port notification. Then these indicators of non-compliance can be identified, and inspectors can use those indicators to target their risk profiling for the vessels that warrant the closest attention, and or for follow-up investigations to request additional information if they're missing information, or if the risks are high enough to make an informed decision to deny the vessel completely. The tool also enables information sharing between users if the users permit the information to share. So it's fully confidential within the tool. So this is helpful because, say, for example, Majuro has a fishing vessel and a carrier transshipping in Majuro port within the Marshall Islands. They can use this tool to conduct a pre-arrival risk assessment and then record in the tool the results of any port inspections and then whether the risks were mitigated and resolved. That can then be shared with, say, Thailand if the final destination of that carrier is then landing in Thailand. And so rather than Thailand having the burden to review the entire risk analysis of the vessel for the entire trip, it can use portions of what, let's say, the Marshall Islands Authority have done and integrate that into their own risk assessment. There are also opportunities to leverage the private sector's purchasing power, because then if these risks and the results of any port inspections are made available to, say, retailers or processors, they can make informed purchasing decisions. For example, if the risks are too high and it doesn't meet their standards, they can deny purchasing. And so I'd like to close out by just wrapping up about the PSM analysis tool. And so this is just a visual depiction of what the tool will look like It will include tracks of AIS data. It will cross-compare it with different vessel licenses and authorizations and machine learning alerts to form a comprehensive national level tool to be able to make informed decisions about port entries to support the Port State Measures Agreement. And I'm really excited to update you all further as we develop this tool. So thank you very much again, and thank you to SEAFDEC, and I really look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, for a very interesting presentation. It is you share the high technologies that could support combating IUU phishing, including remote sensing, including machine learning, ESM analyze tool. This is very excellent and very useful for combat IUU. It seems our fishers, they can do phishing, but our fisher can hide their phishing eye in the sky, intelligence to help manager, to help the surveillance decision. That is very impressive technology. Are there any question? Are there any question from our audience? I checked that. One question from Matthew. It is quite long and is concerns about the IUU is not illegal fishing. It's including with the unregulated and unreported. How can OceanMind deal with and various size of the vessels? Natalie, do you have any answer for question from Matthew?
Yeah, so the idea of the Port State Measures analysis tool is to pick up on other elements of IUU, not just the illegal component that you say. And actually, so far using this tool, it's been extremely effective at detecting unreported phishing, which is one of the hardest components of the IUU element to detect. And so even though at the beginning of the presentation, I focused on our remote sensing capabilities to detect these sort of larger scale vessels on the high seas and the unregulated component. Actually, there are other tools like the machine learning, like the PSM analysis tool that deal with the unreported point as well. So it's a broad approach. It's not just looking for the large scale vessels that are operating on the high seas.
Thank you, Natalie. I hope, Matthew, you are satisfied with the answer from Natalie. We all understand and aware that IUU phishing, this problem is very broad. And to deal with this problem, various tools to combat IUU phishing need to apply. And in different area, in different case, we need to use different tools to combat. And unfortunately that we have one question from our colleagues. Dennis, our colleague Dennis, he has question how do we ensure interoperability of system for initiative from detection, action, apprehensions to prosecution?
This is a really good question about interoperability, and it's really important because we do not want to develop these tools in isolation that aren't interoperable. And so something that we are doing is developing APIs to transfer the data directly to their own systems that they use. So, for example, if a government is using their own, say, VMS system or their own alert system or their own notification system, we can plug into that and then send the alerts or the notifications directly into their own system rather than having to use, say, ours. Another element is also to support the case file management system, and it's something that we are in discussions with the ASEAN IUU network about, to have more shared tools so that there aren't these isolated tools in place. So really good question, and it's something that we're very conscious of. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Seems many persons interested on your presentation and the technology, but the time is very constrained. May I convey question from SEAFDEC Secretariat that is that the system to the installation of VMS on board the vessels who has very good behavior and use only VMS installation only on the vessels that still consider having a risk?
So is the question about selecting high-risk vessels to have VMS on board rather than the entire fleet? Is that, have I understood the question correctly?
Again, please.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I'm not sure if I understood correctly.
Yes. Is that the system to the installation of VMS on board? The vessels who has very good behavior and use only VMS installation only on the vessels that still consider having leaks.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question, because there could be elements to reduce the reporting requirements, so changing the polling rate. But if you start to reward good behavior, that can be a slippery slope, because good behavior should be the standard. And so we don't want to it's tricky to incentivize things like that. For example, the subsidies component. So I haven't observed anywhere where they, for good behavior, they reduce the VMS requirements or don't require it at all. I haven't observed that at all. So I'm not confident that approach would be successful.
Thank you, Natalie. I think everyone try to make tricky on the machine, and they feel maybe look a winner if they can make a tricky on it. Unfortunately, right now we behind the schedule, and please, Natalie, we will send the. You can see the question and you can answer the question by yourselves, and we need to move.
I'll answer in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I thank you for your kind presentation and very interesting one. We will contact you later on to collaborate.
Thank you.
Thank you.